Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very, very, very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. She is from the Auckland University Department of TV, Film and Media Studies, torture film aficionado, and one of the best bloggers in New Zealand, Phoebe Fletcher. And he is the best foreign affairs journalist in New Zealand who brought what was really happening in Afghanistan home in one of the best Metro magazine articles of 2011. Winner of the prestigious Bayo Calvados Journalist Award for War Correspondence, John Stevenson. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, week 3 of our 4-week election campaign, and suddenly the sleepwalk to victory by National looks like a train wreck in slow motion. Have the Epsom Tea Party tapes managed to sink John Key? Issue 2, drug testing beneficiaries. Can social welfare reforms become any more intrusive? Issue 3, 10 years ago this week, the Taliban fled Kabul as Operation Enduring Freedom reached the gates of the Afghan capital. A decade later, what are we still doing there, and have we focused enough on New Zealand's role in this war during the election? And we'll end the show on the final word, but let's kick things off with issue 1. It's been week 3 of the election, and no one is saying, show me the money anymore. They're all saying, show me the tapes. Painfully, a new poll out in Epsom shows this entire thing has been a waste of time, as John Banks is still a distant second to Paul Goldsmith. So not only has the Epsom Tea Party failed to achieve what it was supposed to by saving ACT, it's also horribly damaged John Key. Phoebe, comparing a microphone recording him at a press conference he's called to phone hacking the family of a murdered child, and then using the argument that a politician could be talking about a child committing suicide, and if published, that child did commit suicide to justify gagging the media, are remarkable lapses of judgment, aren't they?
I think they are, and I think that ACT bombing at the moment is a very, strong indicator that that was really the wrong thing to do. National have had a tendency, or Key has had a tendency towards hyperbole and over-exaggeration over the last couple of weeks. We also had, with the beneficiary that brought the case against Paula Bennett, and that leaked from the Human Rights Commission, he also said that that was a violation of Paula Bennett's human rights, which, for a judicial inquiry, right, into an independent government body, that is not right to say. I mean, no, it has not been the right strategy. It has completely dominated the media. There are some people on the right that are trying to say that this was all done on purpose. But I don't think it is. It's damaging ACT so severely. I mean, we've seen Goldsmith out yesterday having to take his own billboards and his electorate down. So TV3 News were running photos of it. So it really is damaging ACT severely.
John, the way Key has reacted to the Epsom Tea Party tapes by gagging the media with the police and walking out of press conferences when questioned on it is worse than what he's probably said. How badly have National handled this?
I think it's been handled very badly by National and to a lesser extent by John Banks. I mean, at least he fronted up last night on 3 News. Probably wishes he hadn't, after Patrick Gower pretty much pulled him apart and made him look like he had a rather casual relationship with truth and honesty. I think Phoebe's right. This is not the only incident, but it's certainly a very, very important incident in the campaign. It tells you a lot about character. Let's be clear, there was some less than acceptable behaviour on the part of the Herald on Sunday. In the first place, I don't think anyone would believe that it was inadvertent that the tape was left there. And in the dictionary under ethical journalism, I don't think the first entry is Herald on Sunday. But that said, there is a very manipulative aspect to politicians calling a press conference and having half, well, not a press conference, but actually staging a media event and having half the nation's media there in an expectation of having a private conversation. I mean, their expectation of privacy, okay, they didn't want people to hear what they said inside, but basically when you've got a question of whether they were dissing old people, whether they were dissing the electorate, and this is a matter of national significance, I think now the momentum is certainly for the disclosure of the tapes, and I'd be surprised if the tapes haven't been disclosed by the time the show goes to air.
But it's not just old people, it's the issue of whether Don Brash will be leading ACT. This has come up as a major thing, is if you are an ACT voter, are you going to give your vote to a party that looks like it may be about to rearrange its leadership shortly after the election?
Precisely, and it's interesting, because let's be very fair here. I mean, John Key, like him or not, you know, this guy is a very formidable politician. You know, he has hardly put
His instincts are better than this,
his
and yet
instincts,
they have
his instincts are extraordinary. And one thing you notice, there's many things, we could have a whole program on this, but what I think you notice with John Key is that when he's in his comfort zone, and he's very comfortable in his own skin, this guy, he's even when he's making mistakes and gaffes, people love him because they think he's one of us, and the liberal intelligentsia that sort of go giggle, giggle, giggle. They haven't resonated with most people in New Zealand. They're prepared to forgive him. But will they forgive him for dissing old people, for doing stuff that looks a bit dodgy and underhand, and that goes against his open, good-natured, bumbling image that he's portrayed? I don't think so. It could well end up being the most expensive cup of tea he's had in a while, and not just because he had it in the Newmarket.
When Helen Clark went through that kerfuffle over Paintergate, it wasn't so much that she'd painted a painting and it hadn't painted a painting and just signed it and had a staffer do it. It was the whole people buying the painting then burning it afterwards. It was the way it was handled that became much more bigger than the actual issue itself. That's what's happened here, isn't it?
I think that is what has happened, and I think that the good comparison to make with that would actually be Helen Clark in 2003 with Corngate, where she dropped 10% in the polls right before the election. John Key has not handled this well. If he was wanting ACT as a coalition partner, well, we have Goldsmith now polling, and the poll this morning at 45.5%, whereas Banks has dropped down to 25.1. He's effectively destroyed his coalition partner, and I do agree with John that there are seriously some issues with ethics around recording in that manner, but not releasing it has created a much bigger storm.
Now, Patrick Gower had in his story when he was interviewing John Banks, he had the transcript in his hand. He was reading off the transcript to John Banks. They know what they've said. For the next 7 days up to the election, they're just not going to let it go.
Yeah, that's why it's an untenable situation. I agree with Phoebe. It hasn't been well handled at all, which does raise questions about the quality of his press secretaries and the advice that he's getting, and also, you know, it raises, in my mind, another very dark question, if you like. The answers that he has given recently tend to be the sort of answers that Don Brash was giving on Crosby Textor's advice back in 2005 when he was challenged, incidentally, by Duncan Garner about would you have put troops into Iraq.
Do you think Crosby Textor advising the National Party?
Well, look at the evidence. Don Brash said, you know, that's not the issue that I'm going to talk about today. I'm interested in talking about, Duncan said, well, my question is blah, blah, blah. He said, well, that's not the question. Duncan said, well, it is the question. I'm asking it to you. Well, Brash, you know, got himself into a lot of trouble on that with Duncan. Duncan was the journalist yesterday who had the balls, and frankly, there aren't many in the press gallery. There aren't many in the press gallery willing to ask the hard questions. Duncan drove that issue yesterday very effectively, said, this is the issue that I'm asking about. Surely we're big enough to have more than one issue in a day, and where's the answer? And he kept pushing it. He did it 4 times. Key spat the dummy and walked out. And I think this tells you a couple of things. When you have good journalism, when you have people prepared to ask the hard questions and rock the boat in the gallery, which frankly we haven't really had for the last 3 years, you can get results, because he was very brittle on this. He was even brittle on Prime TV the week before in a debate. He's a very commanding speaker. He gave brilliant answers on the economy, but when he was questioned about the SAS in Afghanistan and about S&Ps, he produced the same line. I stand by my comments last week. He said it 4 times. Now, that's not an answer.
Is there an irony that John Key is claiming that he's standing up for the principles of not being secretly recorded when he ran through, under a misuse of urgency, the power to allow the police to break into our homes and spy on us?
Of course there is an irony, and I believe he cancelled a press conference yesterday, didn't he, on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which has also been developed in secret. They blocked a select committee hearing for the Greens over this. This is massive legislation that affects even things like our copyright, our industry. Everyone should be concerned about the fact that this has been going through and that discussion is actually being all the discussion around the agreement has been blocked from being released for 4 years after the actual agreement comes through. Yes, there is an irony, and kind of following on from what John has just said there, I mean, what's interesting here is that, you know, John Key is the new Phil Goff. 2 weeks ago, it was Phil Goff saying, I don't want to talk about personality, I want to talk about policy. And John Key saying, well, he doesn't have any personality. A fortnight later, the situation has reversed, and it is John Key saying, I want to talk about policy.
John, as a journalist, how do you feel that media ethics are being used to defend gagging the media?
Well, there's a certain irony there, isn't there? And as Phoebe said, you know, there's also an irony in that, you know, he pushed through the surveillance laws without much discussion or debate, and now he's getting very upset. I mean, I think, to answer the question that you asked me before, is Crosby Textor involved? I think the answer is yes. I've been told by a very well-placed source who supplied information to the Hollow Men that yes, Crosby Textor is still on a retainer. And when you saw the answers yesterday at the press conference to Duncan Garner, you had to say that that was almost a mirror image of what Don Brash was advised to do way back in 2005. In other words, when you get a question that you don't like, just deflect it and talk about what you want to talk about. Unfortunately, as with Brash, that didn't work with a journalist like Duncan Garner. Duncan Garner punched through, kept going. Key was unable to sustain his position, and he spat the dummy and he walked out. And it's not a good look. And the media, who have been equivocating, I think, in some cases about media ethics, probably thought, well, now you're really pushing it, mate. I mean, even some of the lesser journalists in the gallery are sort of going, well, Mr. Key, you can't really leave it there. So I think what you'll see now is a very quick decision the next day or two, try and lance the spoil. I think there'll be either the cameraman will be arrested and it will become sub judice, and that's another matter. Or I think National will have to split the dummy and say, look, we give permission.
But he can't.
Well,
because the police investigation hasn't been finished.
Well, he can give permission, but he will look very foolish because he'll be backing down. So he's in a no-win situation. I mean, this is going to cost them votes. Yeah. The question is, how many?
Question to both of you. The Greens outed some of their own activists this week who attacked National Party billboards. Has middle-class respectability lost them their activist base?
I think this has always been a central problem for the Greens, hasn't it? In that they are trying to appeal to a much broader audience, but they do have an activist base. I don't think that it's going to lose them too many votes. I don't think for many Green voters the billboard thing is an issue. I do think that there is a problem with a coordinated campaign and the fact that it did leave some damage on the billboards. But there are so many people that are Green voters that would go out and do that sort of stuff that are not party affiliated.
Has Russell offended the activist base by throwing them under the bus so quickly? Sue Bradford certainly thought so. Yes.
Well, Sue Bradford obviously has a vested interest,
Yes.
but the answer is probably yes. But I think he did the right thing. Particularly since it's been swamped, his story's been swamped by.
He's pretty happy with that.
Yeah, he's been swamped by the teapot story. So and let's be frank. Every party like the Green Party, particularly the Green Party in Germany, runs into this problem of where the activists collide with the political realists. You had this with the Fundis and the Realos faction in Germany, which led to the split to some extent of the Greens. So I think you see with Russell and certainly with Matera and some of the other people, there's an almost sort of a stylizing of Greens in a more politically acceptable way, and the activist space obviously feel that that's not quite the way we operate. So that's going to have to be resolved for the Greens to stay an effective political party.
It's actually worked to his advantage because it's allowed Russell to position himself as transparent while Key is going through this thing about being secretive. Yeah. So it has actually worked to the Greens' advantage the way that Russell Norman has dealt with it.
In terms of the national electorate, but in party dynamics, I think there'll be people like Sue that feel a bit uncomfortable. But let's be frank, the guy was putting on stickers that could be, he wasn't going out with a blowtorch.
That's right. Yeah. He wasn't spray painting swastikas, was he?
It's hard to beat up on the Greens, really, isn't it?
Or taking down billboards like Paula Bennett's campaign manager got caught out doing the other day in Waitaki.
That's right. In the minor party leaders debate on TVNZ this week, Winston and Hone were judged to have won. What are the ramifications?
I think that this is a bit of a game changer for Winston. I mean, we were all waiting, the commentators, for him to get that bit of media exposure because we knew that gave him the possibility of, reaching for that 5%. I mean, what was interesting about that debate last night was the way that Hone actually came out as a strong leader and came across as a strong leader. I mean, he came second behind Winston in terms of the text polls. He was outstripping everybody else.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think two things. I think Phoebe's right. Very impressive performance by Hone. And Hone has seemed to have morphed from this angry, staunch, nasty, sort of thuggish kind of piece of work, or at least the way many people take him, as a bit more moderate, acting with more mana. And there's a party political ad for him. But I've been impressed by him. I mean, he's one-on-one, he's a really nice guy, and he's done some very good things. He's pushed through the anti-smoking stuff. I've got a lot of time for him, and I particularly have time from now that he's sort of settled down and realised that less is more. Yeah. Winston, well, you can see why people say never write him off.
That's right.
He'll be, he'll be smiling on both sides of his face for the next week, particularly because he has felt, and I think many commentators have felt, that he's been squeezed out of media coverage.
Yep.
No excuse for that now.
Thank you, panel. Moving on to issue 2. National's latest welfare reforms are to drug test beneficiaries for work readiness or they lose their benefits. Phoebe, the New Zealand Drug Foundation said that implementing this style of drug testing for beneficiaries would only lead to deeper poverty for a group who are already marginalised. This is a political decision playing to the public's negative stereotypes of beneficiaries, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, there's a few points that I would say here, apart from the obvious kind of morality and ethics of invading people's privacy like that. The first point that I would say is that New Zealand seems to be a graveyard for failed Republican legislation. If we look at this was something that Rick Scott in Florida tried to introduce, and they thought that they would save millions and millions of dollars by drug testing beneficiaries. What they found was, because they actually made the beneficiaries pay for the drug test themselves, and they got it refunded if they passed. So some people couldn't afford the drug test, okay, so they said that that was a saving. But what they found was that only 2.5% of beneficiaries were taking drugs. So they actually saved about $45,000 instead of the millions that they were talking about. Now the second issue there, aside from the morality and ethics, which I think, if people do have a drug problem, they should be treated as, needing addiction therapy or something like that, rather than it be a kind of punitive measure. But the second problem would be that practically anyway, drug tests don't really work. You could have taken any kind of A-class drug and the half-life of that is usually only a couple of days. So really the only people that they will catch will be people that have smoked marijuana, which gets processed by the body in a different way. It clings onto your fat cells and it can be there for up to 3 months. So, you might have been punishing someone that was sitting next to someone at a party that was smoking a joint.
John, I'm waiting for Paula to start explaining why we need to take DNA swabs from beneficiaries just in case they become criminals. How can the state intrude so deeply into someone's life and no one complain?
Well, I think people will complain, and I think you're right. This is very obviously linked to the election. Once again, it's difficult not to see the dark hand of Crosby Textor here, in the run-up to the election, having a bit of beneficiary bashing. And I also note other issues like the refugee bashing that went on a while ago with John Key, saying that we will decide who comes to New Zealand and so on. It was almost like a replay of Johnny Howard's comments in Australia a few years ago. But I think it raises a lot of issues. I mean, for a start, looking at the level of drug and alcohol abuse in the Defence Force, as we've recently had highlighted, let alone the All Blacks. I mean, are we going to start randomly testing for drugs and alcohol amongst the Defence Force? I mean, they are the beneficiaries of far more public cash.
Yeah. Phoebe, these changes are being justified because of benefit fraud, the cost of benefit fraud. Benefit fraud as a percentage of total MSD Crown expenditure on income support equals around 0.1%. How pressing an issue is this?
Well, it's not a pressing issue, and it's the same as the solo mothers, right, that had a child at 14 and had another kid. Well, Paula Bennett came out on Q&A the other day and she said, well, actually there were only 70 solo mothers in that position. So what we have again here is tiny amounts of people that are kind of being targeted to tap into voters' fears.
Right.
Yeah.
And let's be frank, there's no excuse for anyone, white-collar criminals or beneficiaries, defrauding the public. But we have to have a sense of perspective. I mean, look at the number of directors, company directors, respectable white-collar people who are defrauding a wide range of people in the community of substantial savings, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then getting sort of bailed to Australia to await sentence. I mean, you have to have a sense of perspective. I don't know if you know the story of Alexander the Great, who caught a pirate in the Mediterranean. He got the guy in front of him. He says, well, the pirate said, well, I steal a few trinkets. You call me a thief. You seize whole nations, and they call you an emperor. I mean, we need a bit of perspective here.
You've travelled to many places much poorer than New Zealand. The government like to refer to our poverty now as first world poverty. Do you think that term belittles poverty, or is it a reminder that others do have it worse?
Well, I think it is a reminder that relatively speaking, we don't have the sort of poverty that you find in Afghanistan or Somalia or parts of Africa. But I don't think we should belittle the people who are living and even the people who are not only beneficiaries, but the people who are living on $13 an hour.
Sure.
As Tariana Turia said yesterday on the debate, it is very, very hard to support a family, to pay your bills, put food on the table, pay your rates, all your other expenses on $13 an hour. I mean, those people are really struggling. Are they in poverty by the standards of people that sort of have to be on an IV drip in a hospital in Mogadishu? No. But, is this something that we should be deeply ashamed of in New Zealand? Yes.
Great question to both of you. If we drug test beneficiaries to be work ready, when will we breathalyse politicians walking into the debating chamber? When will that happen?
Well, we're not going to breathalyse politicians.
Why
but it
not?
would be an
Why
interesting
shouldn't
thing.
we?
I mean,
Why shouldn't
New
we?
Zealand legendary for having the pub across the road
That's
from
right,
Parliament.
that's right. It's taxpayer money. It's taxpayer money.
They'd have to close backbenches.
I mean, this is the thing, is that this is ultimately going to flow on and affect children. And I think John is right. People can't live on that amount of money a week anyway. I mean, I know people that are trying to feed themselves and their children for $30 a week. I'd like to see some of those politicians try and do that. And I think that this is going to end up creating more problems.
Who's more dangerous to New Zealand? A stoned beneficiary applying to flip burgers, or a drunk minister signing free trade deals? What's more dangerous?
Well, I think Jane Kelsey and people like that would say that that would definitely be the minister putting ink on the paper. But I think the short answer is that we need transparency in the administration of all public monies. But I think this beneficiary bashing is to some extent quite distasteful, particularly at election time. There's a lot of people out there that are suffering enough, and frankly, it can't be fun supporting a family on $200 or $300 a week. I mean,
it is the politics of division, isn't it?
It is.
It's going after those groups.
And it's actually working. I mean, I saw a debate recently at backbenches, and I was amazed the number of young North Shore ladies wearing blue shirts for a certain political persuasion, hissing and jeering when the subject of social welfare was mentioned. I mean, it's really quite disturbing. It's not the same sort of inclusive society we used to have. Neoliberalism is making its way through the political bloodstream.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. Saturday last week marked the 10th anniversary of the Americans forcing the Taliban out of the capital. So what have we achieved in a decade of war, and has our involvement really been debated in this election? Phoebe, have we properly debated propping up a corrupt narco state on the other side of the planet?
No, we haven't. Okay, and we had come out right before the election campaign began that our troops were engaged in a combat role. Now, that is something that has not been discussed. In fact, the only times that I've heard it discussed have been when Nikki Kay was on Citizen A, or I predict, I'm confused
Citizen
now.
A.
Citizen A. And she was saying that we went in there for the woman, okay? And this was something that I hit her up about because, if you're going into a country for the woman, you've got to look at the multitude of reports that have come out and said that after a decade of civil war, women's position has actually been eroded in Afghanistan. You would also have to look at things like the United States doing a $50 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia and its Wahhabism sect, which also has punitive measures for women, okay? A couple of weeks later or a week later at backbenches, she said that it was Labor's fault because they had sent people in for a combat role. Now, this is just not good enough for a government. They've been in power for 3 years. They should have some kind of credible explanation for Afghanistan. This should be higher up on the agenda for debate. We've got the United States rotating troops through Australia, as they've announced over the last couple of days. And, we've got also this big trade agreement going through that has implications for foreign policy too. So I would like to see some debate.
John, you pointed out years ago that we were not mentoring troops in Afghanistan, but we're actively fighting, and you have led journalistic inquiry into what we have been really doing there. What are your thoughts on New Zealand's involvement in Afghanistan?
Well, I think first it's important to separate the people on the ground from the political and military masters back home. I think most Kiwis would be proud of the integrity and the sense of responsibility with which most New Zealand troops, certainly ones that I've met and spoken to and read about, act in places like Bamiyan and Kabul. For the most part, New Zealanders have behaved with great sensitivity, great goodwill, and great cultural awareness. And I think if the United States had followed our lead, as it were, I mean, it was never going to be like that, but that would have ameliorated a lot of the problems. But unfortunately, we're just a small country, along with countries like Denmark, Norway, Canada, Germany, who have been part of a much bigger, broader effort there, led by the United States, who have made mistake after mistake after mistake. I mean, I've said it before, it's almost like if you tried to design a disaster, you couldn't have done much better than the Bush administration did. It's a terrible, terrible situation. The war is completely lost. They will leave. It will be a disaster. It will be a civil war. Millions will be displaced. Many thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps will die. we seem to be in denial in New Zealand about our role in this. You know, we haven't been responsible for the torture, for the atrocities, for the civil rights wrongs. We've done our best to ameliorate them when we can, but we've been part of one of the biggest criminal enterprises in this century, and it's very sad. And there needs to be an inquiry, in my view. There hasn't been good journalism. Phoebe's right, and it's understandable in a way.
Actually, some of them have been. Felix Marwick, who is the News Talk ZB's chief political editor, was saying that all of his Official Information Act requests on Afghanistan were lost.
Yes.
Leading into the election,
Surprising,
so that there would be nothing released until afterwards.
Question to both of you. Closer to home, the US this week announced a new marine base in Australia. Will the South Pacific become the new friction point between China and America? This is quite a ramping up of getting more troops into Australia, isn't it?
Well, it is. It already is. And if you listen to people like Dr. Paul Buchanan, who's written about this extensively, and former senior lecturer at Auckland University, who's spent several years up in Singapore studying this sort of thing, you'll know that not only is there a prospect of a collision there, but New Zealand is not particularly well placed, because we have the schizophrenic foreign policy where, on the one hand, where, as Nicky Hager points out very, very well in his latest book, we seem to be very determined in this old mentality to get close to the United States, particularly to Britain. You know, the old sort of five fingers of the fist club with Canada and the UK, Britain, Australia, and yet at the same time our country trade-wise and perhaps immigration and a lot of other cultural ways is getting very, very close, in some cases dependent on China.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, China and the United States are going to butt heads.
Yeah.
We will have to work out whose side we're on. Australia very clearly has, but New Zealand's policy seems to be very disconnected in this respect.
Are we going to see the Marines coming to New Zealand?
I'm not sure that we'll see the Marines coming to New Zealand, but I think certainly if we, National Act would be very keen to get closer to the Americans. But I do agree with John, this is a problem. I mean, most New Zealanders aren't aware of the amount of wars that the United States is engaged in. It's currently called Obama's Arc of Instability, and by the end of this year, they will have had troops in 97 countries, and that includes right across the Horn of Africa, because there is this perceived threat in US foreign policy of China. So John is very much right there, and we need to be very careful, especially given that we're right under countries like Indonesia, about where we place ourselves.
Thank you. Let's wrap the show with last word, John. Your last word this week is?
Well, I was going to say we're not likely to see the Marines in New Zealand. They can send a drone to get you from Australia.
Right. They don't need to send Marines. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
A bomber drone.
Bomber drone. Look, my last word, perhaps a little bit esoteric, but nonetheless important. We talked about journalism and the importance of journalism and holding power to account. I was struck last week when I read a speech by Michael Stedman, who's head of Natural History New Zealand, which once used to be part of Television New Zealand, was sold off and became very, very successful, makes many documentaries, does some fantastic work, and is very profitable. Doesn't just produce first-rate documentaries, but is very profitable. He made the point that public broadcasting in this country is being eviscerated, that it's been run for a long time, too long, by politicians and board members of TVNZ and other organisations that basically don't know what they're doing. They have damaged the fabric of this country, and he made a very impassioned plea for more money to be put into public broadcasting. The National Party doesn't think that that's a very good idea. It thinks that the market can rule. What I'd simply say to the viewers is, this is a critical area. If you're thinking about issues that are important to consider when you're voting, have a look at broadcasting policy and who supports public broadcasting.
Phoebe, your final word this evening is?
My final word would have to be the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. There has to be some information that comes out on that. The only information we've had so far are really kind of leaks from the United States. It has so many implications across so many ranges of New Zealand policy. So, for example, if you're someone that was against Section 97A of the Copyright Act, you might note that the United States has just appointed a new copyright czar, and that they are talking about withdrawing, all of the archival material off the net. But there's also implications for the way that we run state-owned enterprises and so on. Okay, so the Council of Trade Unions is going to say that might actually put the brakes on some of the Greens' plans and so on. So we need to have some information about this. This is a New Zealand election. It needs to be transparent.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Phoebe. Ladies and gentlemen, my final word, I find John Key's claim that he is standing up for the principle against secret taping utterly astounding. Key is standing up for the principle against secret taping, yet gave the Pork Board and a dozen other state departments the power to to spy on us. Key is standing up for the principle against secret taping, yet gave the police power to spy without a warrant. Key is standing up for the principle against secret taping, yet misused urgency to expand vast search and surveillance powers against all of us. John Key is standing up for the principle against secret taping, the way Kim Kardashian stands up for the principle of long-term marriage vows. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on